The bell is ringing, but it's not dinner time. That's this week on Motoring 97.
TSN's Motoring 97 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will. And Midas, the way it should be.
On the radio the other day, they were asking people if you could get up in the morning and go to a new job, start a whole brand new career, what would that be? Well, for me, that was an easy decision. That's right, a firefighter. All my life, I've been chasing these trucks. I always wanted to become a firefighter. Well, lucky for them and you, I didn't. But this week, we're going to meet someone else with the same dream. But as we're about to see, Walt McCall also didn't become a firefighter, but without a doubt, he's their biggest ambassador.
Walt McCall has worked for Chrysler Canada for 24 years, so it's not unusual to see a Chrysler product in the driveway. But let's go to the back of the house, and in the garage, a 1925 Seagrave Suburbanite. Walt has had a love affair with fire engines most of his life, and whenever a fire muster is staged, Walt is always there checking out the hardware.
I think that Walt has probably is blessed with a photographic memory. He certainly can always put his finger on the information when you need it. Plus, he's fanatically interested in fire trucks. There isn't anything about it that isn't worth having a look at, and he's able to recall it quickly. And I guess in my own way, I share a small part of that interest, but I'm always amazed by the breadth and depth of his information. Anything you look at, he'll say, oh, that's from so-and-so, that came in 1956, and they sold it, and so-and-so. So it's absolutely phenomenal when you run into somebody like this.
Well, it's certainly been most of my life. I started actively doing this along about 1951, living in East End, Toronto, lived near a fire hall. Walked in there one day, and I've been, I guess, hooked and laddered ever since. They're beautiful things, very impressive. All that red and gold leaf, the wooden ladders, the shiny nozzles and whatnot. Just a boyhood appeal that I simply never grew out of and probably never will. Okay, this picture was taken in the summer of 1954. This was our Windsor Junior Firefighters Club. Interesting where these people went on. Tony Blake became an Air Canada captain. Ricky Yates lives up in, I believe these with Ontario Hydro in Barrie. Pat Binder here is at Chalk River with the Atomic Energy Commission, and I never quite made it. I went into public relations. I started building model fire engines about 1952, and for the next 7 or 8 years, that's all I did through high school. At one time, my collection had about 130 of them. A huge fire department parked under my bed upstairs, drove the cleaning woman crazy because she wasn't allowed to dust in there.
Walter loves fire engines. He chases fire engines. He will get up in the middle of the night and go to a fire, which is okay. We chased fires when we were dating, and we did many years after.
Did you think it a little strange?
No. Walter's interested in everything that goes on around him. He's a walking encyclopedia. I don't think there's anything strange about Walter.
An American publisher approached me and asked me to do a fire engine book. He'd done a series of automotive books and thought there would be need for this kind of a book. I recognized immediately that there was. I figured I was the one to do it. Took about 3 years to put it together. Published in 1976. And we figured this was a one-shot book that might sell 3,000-4,000 copies, because that's a pretty specialized subject. To make a long story short, it's in its 5th printing today, and there's over 35,000 out there, no end in sight. $39.95 US, that's fairly expensive for a book. And it's just amazing how useful that book has turned out to be to other people entering the hobby. And in addition, I do 2 quarterly magazines and 3 bi-monthly newsletters. I guess the largest ones of these is Engine is the quarterly magazine of the Society for the Preservation and Appreciation of Antique Motor Fire Apparatus in America. The other one is the Professional Car. The Professional Car Society is a national group for people who are interested in antique hearses, ambulances, vehicles like that.
There's a picture of you when you were 12 years old, and the caption says, Walt McCall wants to be a fireman when he grows up someday. But you didn't.
No, I probably couldn't have qualified from a height and weight standpoint, but I've played at it a lot. And probably wouldn't have been as much fun doing it for a living. It's been just a very active hobby, and I certainly admire firefighters, and it's a privilege to go into fire halls and eat with the boys and so on, but I guess that's one dream I won't attain, but I've certainly played hard at it.
SLK, slick, lively, and comes with a compressor. This week on Test Drive, the renaissance of the Roadster continues as we take a look at Mercedes-Benz brand new SLK. The SLK's power comes from a 2.3 litre supercharged twin cam that delivers 191 horsepower and 206 pounds-feet of torque. The secret to the broad and plentiful power supply is twofold. First, the valve timing is of the variable variety, and second, the supercharger, or compressor as the Germans call it, delivers 6 pounds of air-to-air intercooled boost. During my time with the car, the engine performed to perfection. The power is strong and linear, the throttle response immediate, and even at relatively low RPM, there is an abundance of torque. Perhaps the only flaw is the exhaust note. It is hollow and raspy and has a tendency to boom at around 3000 RPM. The only transmission offered is an electronically controlled 5-speed automatic. This unit is long on technical wizardry but has an annoying trait. The darn thing always pulls away in second gear. Only if you stand on the gas pedal will it downshift to first, and when it does, it is with a bang. This is not only hard on the car, it's likewise on the driver. You hear me talk a lot about cowl shake. Well, cowl shake is caused by the removal of the roof because you take away one of the key structural members. This SLK is remarkable because there is no cowl shake, and I mean none. Having established a sturdy platform, the engineers added a sophisticated suspension system. Up front, the SLK uses a double wishbone design while the rear utilizes a 5-link or multi-link system. Both ends feature single-stage coil springs, gas pressurized shocks, and a roll bar. The design and execution is first class, meaning the ride is comfortable and the handling competent. The primary reason is that jounce and rebound are exceptionally well controlled. Even on washboard or severely rippled road surfaces, the feel remains perfectly predictable and the car does not hobby horse mid-corner. The top on this Benz is the model of simplicity. Simply set the parking brake, punch one button, and the whole lot is done for you. No latches, no clasps, no nonsense. My pet peeve has to do with the back end of this SLK. Now, it's not to do with the trunk space because, believe it or not, there's enough room in the trunk to accommodate 2 people's luggage. Rather, it has to do with the convertible top. With the roof down, the panel sits here very exposed and it's going to get damaged. Indeed, on the press trip, somebody plunked a camera bag right in the middle of the roof and left 4 dimples. What Mercedes-Benz should have done is to have built in some form of protection for this roof, because damage as it stands right now is inevitable. Stopping power comes from a 4-wheel disc brake system that was lifted straight from the E-Class. No fear of fade here, and the standard ABS ensures the stops are straight and stable. The interior of this SLK has been very nicely finished off. First of all, black on white analog gauges with very petite chrome bezels around them. Adds a sporty flair, as does this carbon fiber look to the IP. Great set of rotary control climate controls, radio easy to use. The really neat part though, everything has been housed in one central location. That includes coffee cup holders. The one area that wasn't thought through very well are the seats. First of all of the adjustment levers, well, they're all over the place. There's one down here, one at the front, and this thing adjusts the backrest. On a car that cost $55,000, I was expecting power seats. As for safety, there is not another convertible that can compare. The reinforced A-pillars and built-in rear roll bars reduce the risk of injury in the event of a rollover. There are airbags for both passengers as well as side-mounted airbags and pre-tensioners for the seat belts.
Well, that's it for this edition of Test Drive. You know, Mercedes-Benz have done a bang-up job with the SLK. The engine and transmission work well together, the suspension does its thing particularly well, but best of all, it's the tightest convertible I've ever driven. All I've got to do now is to save my pennies so I can park one of these in my driveway. That, of course, entails talking to Brad. When we first introduced you to our 626 long-term tester, we said it wasn't living up to its sales potential. Over the next series of updates, we're going to try and find out why it isn't living up to that reputation, and if indeed there is a problem. We're going to start with the trunk. Now, given the car's dimensions, trust me, it is cavernous. We've got an entire chute's worth of camera gear stuck in the back here. The other thing, if you're in the market, consider split folding rear seats, because with them folded down, you can get long items in and it becomes almost as useful as a sport utility vehicle.
This is our #1 event. It's near the end of the year. It's more of a wrap-up of the year's events. I guess we've got 70 cars now. It's the biggest Cadillac showing of its type in Ontario. These type of cars are good to come out and show them off.
I've been looking for a car of this era for about 15 years. I love the late 20s and the early 30s, the classic styles with the dual side mounts like you can see in the running boards. After about 10 years, I finally found something at one of the car auctions and snapped it up real fast. It's a 1929 LaSalle. Everything's original on the car. The wheels are all original spoke wheels. Tires were replaced one time, probably about 25 years ago. Paint was originally a gray color, and about 25 years ago it was changed to the black. You see on front of the grille there's a chip preventer on the front of the car, and there's 2 extra headlights on the bottom, and those turn as you turn the steering wheel to go around the corners, just like the Tucker.
This is a 1957 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, which is the top line of the coupes, but this is the one I'm really proud of because it's a good driver, and in the engine compartment you can see it's all original. It's only got 19,800 original miles on it. I didn't have to restore any part of it, including the paint. It's all original. Interior and so on, it runs beautifully. When you go into the ordinary service station, you tell them to fill it up, they can't find where to put the gas in. So what you have to do is come around to the back, press this little reflector here, and in here is the gas cap. So that's all hidden.
We're very fortunate. 10,000 original miles. Well, a Cadillac is nothing like a Cadillac, really. It's top of the line. They're very well made, easy to maintain, beautiful ride. What else can I say?
Our Midas tip of the week concerns brake dust. A certain amount of brake dust is inevitable with any disc brake system, and many of today's vehicles have four-wheel disc brakes. This particular wheel came off the front of this vehicle just prior to new tires, and you can see an awful lot of brake dust on this rim. Now, this can be a bit of a diagnostic tool. If you have one wheel only that has excessive dusting, you may have a seized or sticking caliper on that position. As I said earlier, it is inevitable, though, if you leave it long enough without cleaning, it may build up to this extent. The problem being that it can really corrode the finish of many of today's aluminum wheels. Because the dust has metal particles in it, it will pit and corrode the wheel. Every time it gets wet, you've got some corrosion. Try and clean it off on a regular basis with the least abrasive cleaner that you can possibly use. That's your Midas tip of the week.
A portion of Motoring 97 is brought to you by the Solder Seal Gunk family of automotive products, makers of Puncture Seal Gold and Liquid Wrench.
It was Friday, but for Sunoco customers, TGIF means thank goodness it's free. Sunoco was serving up free gas for 94 minutes to celebrate the launching of a new product.
This product for the Greater Toronto area is ethanol enhanced gasolines, and it's up to 10% ethanol. It's custom blended like the rest of our products. And the other thing that we've done is we've brought some high performance vehicles on the site, a Ferrari Testarossa, a Lotus, and a Viper, to introduce to our customers that this gasoline is good for any car. The prime reason for using it is that it reduces unburned hydrocarbons, it reduces emissions of carbon monoxide by up to 30%, and it reduces toxins. The other is that it's a renewable resource. It's made from Ontario-grown corn, and also it's at the same cost as regular gasolines.
Sunoco owns 50% of United Co-ops, and we're supplying all their ethanol gasoline, and they have a pretty big market in southern Ontario. Out west, it's big in BC and Alberta. There's Mohawk Oil. It's big in Saskatchewan, but there's just a shortage of ethanol for blending, and that's the main reason you're not seeing more of it right now.
Now, when you see an old relic like this, you know there has to be a story behind it. And of course, the man who gave me the story, none other than Walt McCall. It's all written down here. Unlike Walt, I cannot store it up here. But anyway, this is a 1931 T33 front drive city service ladder truck. It's one of only two built. One was built for the Toronto Fire Department. The other went to Manila in the Philippines. Now, this is the original picture of the truck the day it came out of the plant 65 years ago. This picture of the same truck in service at the old Bolton Street Fire Hall in Toronto, long since torn down. And this is a picture of Captain Mel Budd, who oversaw and did most of the restoration work on this truck in the early 70s. Now, Mel has since passed away, but this truck indeed is a monument to his hard work. Now, here's some more trivia. In 1931, it sold for $14,000. It has over 302 feet of wooden ladders, and it can be steered either from the back or the front. So there you go. All right, now let's head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
Brad, I've always had a bit of a fire department fascination and a bit of a connection too. A lot of my friends work for the Mississauga Fire Department, and one particular early customer of mine, one of my first customers when I started out on my own, is a fellow named Alf Stone. He used to sell fire trucks. I know Toronto Fire Department was one of his customers. I'll bet you Walt McCall either knows him or has heard of him. In any case, I'll tell you one thing I'm quite often doing at the shop these days, and that's putting out fires, figuratively speaking. This is a perfect example. This 91 Chev Lumina belongs to a longtime customer of ours at the shop. About a month ago, we had to rebuild his transmission. The car had to be towed in. It had failed completely. Now, 3 to 4 weeks later, he developed a problem with the car whereby the speedometer would falter and then return to zero while he was driving along. The service engine light would come on the dash. The car started doing some rather bizarre things as well. It alternately would have a very high idle speed racing, and then at other times it would be excessively low and actually stall. And several times he had to restart the car and actually give it some gas to keep it going when he put it in gear. Now, what I want to show you today is what we ultimately found wrong with the car. We thought that we'd maybe failed to connect the vehicle speed sensor, or maybe bent a pin or damaged some wiring harness when we were doing that transmission. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, and after we did some testing on the car, it became pretty apparent what was wrong. I'll take you under the hood and show you what we had to replace. Whenever you have a drivability problem like this Lumina had that brings on the service engine soon light, power loss, or check engine light on the dash, you should have a fault code stored in the memory. And in fact, this car had a code 51 when we tested it. Now, 51 in this car refers to a problem, a memcal error, a problem with the memory calibration device in the car's computer. Now, we checked that out, cleared the memory, and it quickly reset a code 35, which on this car refers to an idle air control circuit problem. Now, I fully expected to see a code 24, and in fact it didn't have that one in the memory. Turns out we had a bad computer on this car. On this Lumina, the computer's located out under the hood in the right front corner of the car. Now, I've removed the coolant overflow bottle, a white plastic bottle that used to sit right here. and I've set it aside. Now, there's our computer. I've also unplugged the harness going to the computer. The computer sits in a little plastic cradle right here ahead of the right front shock absorber. Now, interestingly, these computers used to be inside the car. Middle to late 80s cars typically had them inside the car behind the dash, and we were always told they had to be in there to keep them warm, dry, and clean. Well, of course, they quickly moved them out under the hood. We thought they'd fail at a greater clip, and they didn't. We're still replacing them at roughly the same rate. Now, I've already unplugged the wiring harness on this particular car so that I can set the computer aside. And if we look a little bit deeper into the fender here, we can see the harness that plugs into our computer. Now, you've got to be careful when you're servicing these not to damage or bend any of the delicate little pins that connect the wiring harness to the computer. And there's a little device inside the computer called a memcal that we've got to exchange. We've got to remove the one from our old computer, put it in the new one before we install it in the car. Now there's our newer replacement computer. This particular one is rebuilt. We got it from General Motors. It's $206 for this unit, and interestingly there's a $200 deposit. They really want this thing back to rebuild it. And that's the way you would go about servicing this type of a problem. If you had a problem with the computer, you're going to install a reconditioned or a new unit depending on the make and model of car. In many cases, it takes longer to diagnose the problem than it does to actually replace the component that's bad. And that's certainly the case with this computer. And once we reinstalled the computer back in our Lumina and road tested the car, it was back running like a top. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 97.
Look at that. You whack a minivan with something hard, you're going to damage it. More breathtaking revelations next on Kenzie's Corner. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety is a lobby group financed by the insurance industry. Now, it appears their main function in life is to try to embarrass the car manufacturers. Maybe they figure if people hate car makers more, they'll hate insurance companies less. Fat chance of that. Now, the Institute has just released a report which compares the bumper crash performance of 9 popular minivans. And the basic conclusion is, if you slam a minivan forwards or backwards into a steel pole or a brick wall, you're going to damage it. Now, there's a news flash for you, like we need an institute to tell us this. Now, the best van of this bad lot turned out to be the Honda Odyssey at less than $500 per crash. The worst, well, it was the dear old Ford Aerostar at just under $1,500 per crash. Now, this one conclusion alone shows a breathtaking ignorance on the part of the Institute about 3 fundamental laws about the way the world works. Now, the Aerostar is the heaviest vehicle in this comparison. If you crash a heavy thing into a wall, it's going to suffer more damage than a light thing. Now, we don't need the Insurance Institute to tell us that either, do we? They also should know from their own statistics that heavy vehicles protect their occupants better than light vehicles, but they're only slagging the car makers for bumper protection in this week's report. Next week they'll get after them for occupant protection. Now, the Aerostar is also the oldest vehicle in this test, and let's face it, there's been progress in automotive engineering. Ford's newest minivan, the Windstar, scored very nearly as high as the Odyssey. You simply can't expect an old van to perform as well as a new one. And the Aerostar is also the cheapest van in this comparison. May not be the greatest thing in the world, but you could slam this puppy into a wall 10 times and not make up the difference in price between it and an Odyssey. Now, this report's got nothing to do with highway safety at all. It's completely pointless. If the insurance industry wants to get into the downsizing game, maybe they could downsize its institute completely out of existence. Maybe then they could also downsize your insurance premium, and I'd vote for that. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Hey guys, wait for me! Like I said, these guys know what they're doing and they're leaving me behind. Story of my life. Anyway, we'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them. Maybe I can catch up.
Nothing could be finer.
TSN's Motoring 97 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas, the way it should be.